morning, everybody. My name is Jess Campbell. I'm the Vice President of Food and Agribusiness, specializing in swine for Farm Credit Mid-America. We're a financial services cooperative that represent 80,000 customers across Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. As team members of the agribusiness team here at Farm Credit, my colleagues and I are exclusively focusing in the swine industry. We work with some of the largest swine producers in the country, and we're well versed in the trends and issues you face. So I do want to thank you guys for taking time out of your day to join us. Because of our specialized focus and close relationships with our producers, we are seeing the impact and challenges of COVID-19 in the marketplace and is creating for you firsthand. Over the past few weeks, I've spoken with many of you and listened to your concerns and questions. In light of the severity of the situation, we felt it was more important than ever to come into an in-depth outlook from market experts and hear from leaders in the pork industry. We hope you find this information provided in our time together today to gain answers to many of the questions you have, as well as next steps for the challenges you are facing. It is my pleasure to welcome our guest speakers in the webinar. Today you will hear from Joseph Kearns, President of Kearns & Associates, Dr. Steve Meyer, economist with Kearns & Associates, Bill Even, the Chief Executive Officer for the National Pork Board, and Craig Bowling, VP Resource Development for the National Pork Producers Council. We know this is a very busy time for each of our presenters, and we want to thank you for being with us to share your insights and expertise with our customers. Before we get started with the presentation, I want to take a few moments to share a little bit about Farm Credit Mid-America. As part of the Farm Credit system, we are committed to securing the future of rural communities and agriculture. Through our Food and Agribusiness Division, Farm Credit has dedicated experts across the livestock and commodity industries, including swine. Today, our team works with many of the largest pork producers, integrators, and processors to secure the financing they need to remain competitive. Our financial strength allows us the flexibility to work through these current challenges alongside you. We know and understand that navigating this present crisis is your top priority. We want to be a partner for the immediate future and beyond. That's why our products and solutions are intended to help you navigate the coming days, weeks, and months while keeping your eye focused on the long-term impact. In times like these, we encourage all producers to speak with their lender early and often. Following today's webinar, we will encourage you to continue to reach out and work with us to find solutions to your challenges and needs. I will now hand the presentation over to Joe Kearns to tell you a little bit more about himself and provide a grain outlook.
Jess, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Happy to be here with you this morning. We're going to roll through some pretty dynamic items here today, both as well as the information that I'm going to present. We've got some really good things going on the grain side of it. If you're a livestock producer, it's going to be tough on the agronomic side, and I don't think there's any need to pull any punches along those lines. And Dr. Steve Meyer then will also be talking just a little bit more in depth about how the COVID scenario is playing out inside the meat side of it, the meat industry, which is very, very dynamic here. The title of my slide here today is Big Hints Inside of the Turmoil. And I would contend that in the event we didn't have the social ramifications of the disease that we're running through the United States and the rest of the world, that we'd be having a heck of a lot more focus on what's going on to the grain side here, and we're going to point some of those out. You're going to see the same slide from Dr. Steve Meyer. We are licensed traders. We are providing our best opinion today. If you take that counsel and trade on it and lose money, that is your responsibility. We are CFTC regulated, and that's ways that they make us roll this thing. Let's take a peek here. Let's kind of set the stage for the environment that we're in. And this is courtesy of Goldman Sachs. And if you'll notice that one of those things is not like the others, and that is their second quarter of 2020 forecast for GDP. And guys, to say that we are in unprecedented times, maybe it's within our lifetime. Perhaps the Spanish flu a century ago kind of started to usher in a similar scenario here, but we've never had this type of economic drawback within our own GDP borders. And you'll notice that the second quarter, the quarter that we're currently in, is going to usurp the previous worst quarter, which is the one we just got out of. And so in order to kind of comprehend the scenario here, I think this is very, very important. We've never been here before. We're flying a little blind on how these things are all going to transpire. We're going to do our best today to talk through some of these things. Those of you in the lean hog production sector don't need a hint of the shape and slope of this line, this kind of rightward, downward leading line as far as your revenue item is concerned. You've lived it every single day. You're not the only one. Crude oil, and we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about crude oil and its impact to the corn market here. Crude oil has had a miserable existence, as had lumber markets. It's not just us that's getting whacked via this economic scenario that we're currently going through. It's the entire industry when we take a look across all spectrums. Getting a little bit more granular here when we take a look at the crop that's currently going into the ground and in some cases a record pace, and I'll show you what that looks like. When you take a look at our total acreage matrix, it's not changing very much, i.e. prices, although not profitable to the grain sector, are not so low that we're allowing areas to lay fallow in any significant degree. We did have the big prevent plant last year that's certainly looking for a rebound this year as far as acres are concerned, but we're not at a dire straits as of yet as far as acres are concerned. And when we take a look at the March planting report there, most of this is blue. Anything that's blue is up on acres on corn. Anything that's red is down. And you'll notice that the heart of the entire Midwest is blue. This is largely trying to catch up from perhaps a chemical application from last year, a fertilizer application, and trying to utilize some of those monies that were sunk into the ground. And we are off to a very, very fine start. Now, part of it might be, well, goodness, in February, corn was trading nearly $4 a bushel. This came out, this survey would have been taken in early March, and so we would have been just right on the heels of that. Are we going to shift acres? And the answer is probably not. Probably not. Economics are not the driver in the spring of getting corn planted, strangely enough. It is, what are the field conditions, and can I sit on the tractor long enough in order to accomplish my intended goals? And certainly the answer appears to be yes. We had our meteorologist on the phone yesterday. The balance of the planting season does look to be favorable, specifically for the west side of the Mississippi River, but that does not portend a drought into the summer. They're a very normal weather pattern. We're just off to a really, really early start. If you'll notice some of those times when we had decreases in the area of final plantings relative to the March prediction, those of you that have lived through that are aware that 1993, the flood scenario that we had. We had the drought in 1995 that reduced some acres, and of course the 2019 scenario that we just came through. Bottom line here is economics are not the driver of corn acres. Field conditions are. And if we take a look at the information that we got from the USDA on Monday, we are off to a fine pace as far as the nation goes in getting corn in the ground. We're the fourth fastest ever, kind of in the middle of the herd there, mind you, not breaking any records, but off to a very nice pace. When we take a look at our friends up in Minnesota on the west side, I think this kind of depicts the better field conditions on the west. I would have a similar slope to it that they're off. It's by the way, it's that black line. I'm not sure if my cursor shows up here, but it's this black line right here that Minnesota is off to a very, very fine start to the season here. I bring up the top three corn producers for a reason here, and that is, number one, the United States is still the king of corn and most likely will be for as far as the eye can see. This is going to be a contrast to what I'm going to show you is going on the soy side of it, and it makes for an interesting kind of comparison here. But the United States is number one in corn production. We produce roughly 38% of the world's corn. China is about 2/3 of what we do, and then Brazil kind of holding steady at about 1/3 of what we do here. So, and I don't see those numbers changing very significantly as we go forward here. This oil scenario has its roots as it relates to corn back to the mid-90s, back actually to the Bush administration. And let's roll back kind of your memory to the history is we had the fall of the Soviet Union, and so therefore the Cold War was coming to a conclusion. We had the Gulf War that was initiated in the early 90s. If you remember, the oil fields in Kuwait were afire. And our next big threat was what happens if we need to depend on OPEC for our energy needs. And the EIA at the time had put forth this red line of the trend of what they expected. And they were largely right for an extended period of time there. From the early 90s through 2005, the blue line was actual use. We followed along very, very closely as far as motor fuel consumption. At about 100, we peaked at about 140 billion gallons in 2005, which is, voila, right about the time we introduced ethanol to the marketplace. So I find that to be an interesting contrast. And if we take this same data set that we had at that point in time and superimpose about, well, what did the next 20 or so years look like? Here's the same firm, and this is what they were looking at. And this is pre-COVID scenario here, is fewer miles driven, better fuel economy of the vehicles that we do drive, and even some of them that don't require any motor fuel whatsoever, i.e. Teslas. So the utilization of, miles driven, and therefore the consumption of gasoline was already expected to fall. It just happened at a much, much quicker rate than what we anticipated. Keep in mind here, so I'm going to use some of these numbers later. So 140 billion gallons is what we had been using. It was projected to fall to 110 in about 2035. Well, the 110 was right. It just happened last week here. We're already at that run pace. And so when we take a look at gasoline consumption, early in March when we started having the restrictions of driving that occurred is we had a precipitous fall from grace. And this is going to have, some carnage along the way that most of you are aware of when it comes to the pricing implications here, is that we had the price of ethanol actually traded at a premium to genuine gasoline for a period of time here, and this kind of makes you sit back and wonder about what the societal benefit is of the renewable fuel standard. It's one thing if it's keeping perhaps foreign oil off of our back. It's another thing if we as the United States are BTU energy independent. The form is another question. We have more natural gas than BTUs than we do gasoline BTUs, so there's a form issue there. But suddenly when unleaded gasoline RBOB is trading at a 20 or 30 cent discount to ethanol, what is the merits? And I pose that as kind of a rhetorical question. I've got my own opinion on what that looks like here. Those of you that lived through here 2 weeks ago might have remembered that to the expiration of the May contract, is crude oil actually traded negative for the first time in history. And we were watching this, guys. We were watching this as it went tick by tick by tick. And someone says, surely it can't go to zero, can it? And we looked up the rules, and yes, it can. And not only that, it can go to negative numbers. And 5 minutes later, we were trading 30 under. It was just this precipitous fall from grace. And my point is, this is yesterday from CNN. It could do it again. I don't think that that's just a one-time event. The storage scenario that led to the negative prices is still with us. It could do it again, and it's starting to roll back over into something that's more meaningful to us, i.e. corn. And we've already seen an idling of these ethanol facilities over time. We just had ADM announce a shutdown of 2 of their largest facilities also, to the point of that black line represents here's what our motor fuel, or our ethanol production looks like. And then you say, well, that might be a little more precipitous fall from grace than what our consumption looked like on the graph a few slides back. Yeah, you're right. Here's the problem. We ran out of storage of ethanol too. The raw ingredient of ethanol is corn, and you can pile corn on the ground or put it in bins, and we've got a year's worth. The raw ingredient of unleaded gasoline is crude oil. That's a little tougher to pile on the ground, and so we've got just kind of the different forms and flows that are creating some real aberrations. Amidst all this, there's great opportunities. It's just kind of some treacherous stuff, and that leads us into the corn S&D, and this is my point. Those of you that are not used to reading these charts is production is on the top, the consumption is in the middle, and then the ending stocks is kind of our governor of demand. And those of you that had a lawnmower as a kid that would rev up and then kind of reduce itself back down again, it's a governor. That's what the ending stocks function is. And when we take a look at that top line, that top green line that gave us a yield per acre, you'll see that last year was kind of our very difficult growing year, yet it was only off about 5% on production. I think that's a remarkable thing. For the purpose of this exercise, I put yield in at 175. Actual trend line yield is 178.1, and I'm doing this on purpose. I put my planted acres at 95. You might recall from the previous slide, USDA said we're at 97, and the planting conditions are good. The problem is if I put in 97 and the trend line yield, the carryout gets so incredibly large, it becomes almost unbelievable. It's already here, the way that we're going to take a look at this. The feed and residual side, I've just kept static year over year as far as animal numbers. Ethanol use, I've backed down to 80%. Currently, we're running at about 60%. I do think we're going to rebound once we loosen things up. And I also believe that we've learned a few things throughout this lockdown, i.e. we can stay at home and get along just fine. We don't need to commute, and maybe commercial office space is the biggest loser of this. Bottom line is when you get down to that ending stocks number and you can let your eyes kind of drift across there of where we've been at this 1.7 billion bushel carryout or so, moving up to 2 billion bushels. My best guess is for this year is coming in closer to 3.6 billion bushels. That gives me a 24 to 25% carryout to use ratio, and I went back to the archives and found out when's the last time we've even approached that, and that was 15 years ago. In 2004, 2005, when we were trading at about a 20% carryout to use ratio. And notice what I highlighted in yellow there, guys. Corn that year traded at $2.06. I'm not saying we're going to head back there, but I do think directionally that we're starting to set ourselves up for that pace. That 25% carryout to use ratio would cause us to completely rescale this chart. That's how dramatic that number is. When we take a look at our exports, they've been lagging behind. We have not been all that fantastic. The February data is the last that we have. We'll get the March data out next week at the first week of May here. But right now, our cumulative exports have been running behind schedule, and we've been losing it to other countries. So for the corn market, the demand side has been the nemesis. First, we had the ethanol taking a whack. Animal numbers have been kind of static, and then the third place that we look is in the export market, and there's a lot of yellow and orange on this chart, and I apologize for that. But just notice the trend. That big bar is the United States, the third one from the left, a year over year. And notice that our exports have been falling down, and we've been forfeiting that to our competitors. This is an exchange rate issue that's going to be much more graphically displayed once I get to the soy side. Here's corn as of yesterday as we were approaching some life of contract lows. I wanted to say that yesterday morning we were coming very close on the May contract in order to start trading with the 2. It was 3.0 something, it was 3.05, 3.06 in that area. It was fighting. Don't be surprised. Here's bottom line on corn. We have too much. We have too much across the world. The whole ethanol scenario has put a death knell into the corn market. Ethanol represented roughly 40% of the whole corn offtake, and we just can't see that type of compromise and anticipate that prices are going to stay too high. From an animal agriculture standpoint, this is good news. From an agronomic standpoint, there's some other plays that you're going to need to have. The insurance component is certainly one for 2020. Selling your 2021 crop and even 2022, where it currently sits, is also, I think, an advocable position, and don't be surprised if we get a set-aside program for 2021. Soy components are also, blue is added acres, the red is a decline in acres, and notice that this is predominantly the rebound from the prevent plant year more than anything else. But across, again, across the bulk of the Midwest is you're going to see more soy acres, and this is the one that I think is fun. Illinois is off to its fastest start ever in soy plantings, but it's not with corn. And you go, well, why is that? Well, soil conditions are fantastic. The fields are working up nicely. The temperatures are a little cool, and farmers think that you can let a soybean sit in the ground a little bit longer with cooler weather rather than corn, and that kind of explains that. But we're off to a good start. This is what I wanted to share with you. If you contrast the year we've just gone through with the year that we're in, is the United States was, as in past tense, the king of corn and the king of soybeans. We handed that mantle over to the Brazilians as far as the king of soybeans is concerned in this past year. And guys, we're not going to look back. And there's economic rationale for doing so. And I just think that thinking we're going to regain our top billing might be fighting a little bit of a losing battle. Another little bit of a losing battle here is our dependence on this Phase 1 agreement that is supposed to bring largesse back into the agricultural sector. Somebody forgot to tell the chief economist of the USDA. You'll notice in the middle of that screen, it shows China going from 2019 to 2020 up about $4 billion worth when we're expecting something significantly more than that, $15 to $20 billion worth of gain. So I think that there might be a little bit of a hint if you're hanging your hat on soybean shipments to China being the salvation. I don't see it. Right here is our minimum target set for 2020 is $36 billion worth of agricultural exports. And you'll notice again, we got the Fed data. We're running woefully short of the pace needed in order to make that happen right now. Bean exports out of the United States have running behind, and if beans are running behind of the United States, you know where it's coming from, and that is our soybean exports to China. That black line doesn't have much of a slope to it. One of our least productive years as far as exports, and we're now into a time frame where the United States is planting, South America is harvesting, and we're going to forfeit the bulk of exports over the next 6 months to the South Americans. And they've already kind of hogged us out of the one side of it. I don't see anything that's going to give us any reprieve anytime soon. We're off to a slow start as far as exports to China are concerned. That pink line that is below is the tariff years and kind of the trade war that was initiated, and I still think we've got a heck of a hangover coming therein. This kind of depicts what I was just sharing with you. Our loss is the Brazilians' gain, and guys, this is not going to stop. Soybean S&D is set up in the same manner. Our production is on the top. Consumption is in the middle. And this is kind of a milquetoast type of environment that we're in right now. I do expect it will rebound and come back to a trend line yield of just above 50 bushels to the acre. And again, if you let your eyes fall to that bottom line, that ending stocks line, it's very, very similar to where we are right now. Stocks to use ratio is also very similar. It's kind of just this blasé type number. You can't get real excited about it. We're not going to get rich planting beans, but it looks like it's going to stay relatively well supported at the same time. So we kind of shrug. Here's the long-term problem. If you are a Brazilian farmer, beans have never been higher than what they are right now in your currency. That's an important component. We tend to think of things in dollars per bushel, and the Brazilians do also. And then they've got an exchange rate to take into consideration. And with the exchange rate in Brazil reaching record highs, i.e. weak Brazilian real versus the U.S. dollar, that converts into an incredible incentive for them to do exactly what they have been doing, adding more acres, and to continue to do nothing other than that, continue to add acres. This is not unique to Brazil. The Argentinian peso is also weak. As a matter of fact, it was off 50% last year. It's off another 20% so far this year, and that's the official rate. The blue market rate is almost 2x of what the official rate is. The bottom line scenario, guys, is we're providing the South Americans every incentive in order to put beans in the ground for two reasons. Number one, it's the return has never been there, and number two, it's their hedge against inflation. It is how they're going to handle this. The one opportunity that might be around the corner is when we take a look at soybean meal exports, not soybeans, but soybean meal, is Argentina has long been the world leader in soy exports. Well, given some consternation that they have down there because of their currency and the bankruptcy of the equivalent of Cargill in South America, is we might see some of that come back to our shores here. When we take a look at ending stocks across the world, you'll notice that Argentina has more stocks than anybody else. Why is that? hedge against inflation. They're being very logical with their behavior. Here's the bottom line. There might be something to watch, and that is if everything goes okay, we're probably just fine. But if this Argentinian crushing industry continues to suffer some financial woes and that the world buyers come back to the United States, we could be called upon in order to supply more soybean meal to the world. And we don't have time to get into it in this presentation, but if anybody wants to talk about soybean meal, soybean oil relationship, I think there's something there that's also worthy of taking a peek. And with that, Jess, I would either take questions or I believe I'm just going to turn it over and hand the ball back to Dr. Meyer. Is that correct?
That's correct. We have the attendees muted due to the number of them.
All right. And Steve Meyer, I believe I gave you the ball.
I believe I have it. I'm going to
Okay.
assume you can hear me, and so unless Jess starts screaming at me or something. So, okay. Yeah, Jess says, gives me the thumbs up. It's time to go. Okay. Let's get right into this. Whoop, I went backwards. I don't need to tell you what Joe said. He probably says it better than I would anyway. And so let's talk about pork. Obviously Joe owns the company because he took the grains and he gave me hogs, and so it's certainly very difficult times. And I don't want anything I say today to hit anybody as being flippant or anything like that. The disclaimer for Joe put up here earlier, I'll put up as well. We are an introducing broker for FC Stone, and we have some fiduciary responsibilities to our clients. And you need to realize that we're doing the best we can with this, but should you trade anything on this, it's your risk. Let's remind ourselves there are still a few things that are good about the pork industry, and one of them is that there's still great need in China. There's still about a 17.5 million metric ton gap in how much protein they have and probably how much they can get their hands on and how much they've eaten in the past. That still remains. Nothing has changed that. Our normal output in the United States is about 12 million metric tons. So you can see how that gap is. That's still an opportunity. Now, whether we're going to be able to capitalize on that is another question. The second one is, and Joe underlined this very well, is that our costs of production are the lowest they've been since 2006. We've actually got projected costs of production for the best 25% of producers that are out there, which I think these Iowa State estimates actually represent, below $60 for the second half of 2020. And so that's a positive. Now, average producers are probably about $5 a hundredweight higher than this, but still, that would still be the lowest for average producers since 2006 as well. And that goes back all the way pre-ethanol. And Joe laid out why that's going to be happening, and it's mainly on the back of the corn business, but certainly it helps us here and it is a positive for the pork industry going forward. Record production plus demand crisis plus processing bottleneck equals disaster. And I do know how to spell bottleneck, but I left the K off there. We've got, we were set up for a tough year this year anyway because of high production, slaughter that was going to run significantly above last year, which was a record, which was significantly above the year before, which was a record. And even though we'd had new packing capacity open since 2017, we had grown the output of pigs enough to test that. Not only because of growth in the breeding herd, but mainly, and I think primarily, because of growth in productivity. But now, we have faced a situation where we got that record production and we've got problems moving it. First, retail demand is higher due to food service limitations. We saw the run on the grocery stores back in March that was unprecedented. I mean, it completely emptied out meat cases, and we've never seen that happen before. Food service demand is down sharply. It looks like it's recovering some, though. The food service operators have found different delivery methods, and so some of that is coming back, and we have some states, including where I live in Oklahoma, that are going to start relaxing some COVID restrictions as early as late this week, and they're going to start opening up dining areas and restaurants and some things like that. Now, I don't know how many people are going to go, but they're going to be open. And so that means that we're going to see some reduction, some response on the food service side of this business. Export demand remains strong. I'll show you that in a minute. And that's going to kind of create a conundrum for us at some point. And so wholesale demand has swung wildly. It was first down when we first started this thing because of closure of restaurants, and then it was up because of this run on the retail markets, and then it was back down, and now we don't know exactly where wholesale demand is. We think it's strong because we have retail, but now we have the COVID-19 outbreaks, and absenteeism has created this packing capacity problem, which has restricted the supply of product going into those wholesale markets. And we see the cutout value well above where it was back before all of this started, and probably going higher. We've got beef cutout values beyond $350. I think it's very easily that we're going to have beyond a $100 cutout value on hogs, in probably not the very distant future. And the situation on the packing side is still concerning because in some of our key packing states, the projections for the COVID disease peaks and death losses and the use of resources and number of cases, it wasn't until this week in early May and even into mid-May. So I don't think, we're not, the worst of it in some of our key packing states is not behind us yet. And we're already dealing with much tighter pork supplies, and of course the terrible situation of where do we go with market-ready hogs, and we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, the March Hogs and Pigs report. Remember that? That was just 5 weeks ago, and it seems like ancient history, and we kind of look back on it and go, I don't know exactly what we can draw from it. Well, we can draw some important things. Number one is we had slowed the growth of the breeding herd, which is a positive long run for us. We needed to probably do that given the number of hogs we were going to have relative to full capacity this fall. We still are growing productivity rapidly. December, February pigs saved per litter were up almost 3%, down at the bottom of the chart. That drove a December, February pig crop up 4.7%. Can't argue much with that because farrowings were larger during the quarter as well. The supply of market hogs at the end on March 1st was 4.3% larger. We're dealing with that as we speak. So these all lay out the number of animals that are going to be available. And now we have to try to reconcile that against a limited ability to process them. This led us to bring these forecasts are shaded in gray here. I put 3 other sets of forecasts up with them just for comparison. We thought that second quarter slaughter would be up about 4.4%. It's not going to be anywhere near that because we just haven't been able to operate the packing capacities. That doesn't mean the pigs weren't there, though. And so we'll talk about that in a minute, too. We thought this third and fourth quarter were going to moderate a little bit on year over year, but we're still going to be up 3.5% for the year. Lee Schultz at Iowa State had 2.6% on that. LMIC, Livestock Marketing Information Center out of Denver, at 4.2. The USDA numbers shown here are production numbers, so they're not head, they're pounds, million pounds, and they had 5.1%, which would fit pretty well with a 3 or 4% increase in slaughter, in just federally inspected slaughter. Excuse me, I got distracted by an incoming phone call there. But here's what that translates into. Our forecast for slaughter is the red smooth line that you see in this chart. And you can see what slaughter's done. We had the surge back in March, and then it has fallen rapidly because of where we've been with packing capacity. The X marks about where we're going to be this week on slaughter, just a little over 1.6 million. That's the lowest non-holiday week since back before 2004. We think that we're going to get, this may be the worst of it this week. We'll talk about that in specific here in a minute. And if so, we'll start increasing the effective amount of slaughter capacity we have each month as we go forward. The problem is right now we're guessing, and it's not really much more than a guess, that we may not get back to within 90%, within 10% of our original production slaughter capacity here. Changes in the way we're going to have to run slaughter plants is probably going to rob them of some capacity. And if we're down 10%, then instead of 2.755 million, we can slaughter about 2.48 million per week. And when you look at that relative to where we still would have been this fall, we're still going to be in a position of very serious situation throughout 2020. Now, this capacity that I have, I do a survey every summer and publish it in National Hog Farmer. And I ask, how many hogs can you kill in a normal day if margins are good and hogs are plentiful? Now, the last 2 summers, I've also asked if labor was a limiting factor for these packers. In general, the large plants did not report much labor difficulty. They said, well, a little bit, but it'll impact us. We won't capture quite all the value of the offal or something like that. Smaller plants were having a lot more problems. And I think, that biggest impact is on value recovery. I think the real issue here is if you're short 20 or 30 people in a plant that employs 1,000, that's not a big deal. If you're short 20, 30 people in a plant that employs 400, that is a big deal. And so I think that's really the difference between the large and small plants having problems. The COVID-19 problems have been way more severe, of course. We've had, as of yesterday, we had 44% of capacity down. 3% of that was mechanical. I mean, you can't win for losing sometimes. And, we had a serious situation with some flooding at the plant in Sioux City that took it down completely yesterday. It was, it had been operating at a reduced rate already, but we sure didn't need it to go down completely. But that was about 3% of this 44%. The executive order that the president signed day before yesterday is very well intended. But my judgment is it won't help much, if any. I think the most important facet of that order was that it would put OSHA on the side of packers in any liability claims if the packers went by the CDC guidance on distancing and those kinds of things, and it made a good faith effort to try to control this. That packers were concerned that if they start reopening plants and they have the new breaks, they would have some liability in that. This helps them on that. I don't think it relieves them of liability, but it certainly helps them. No one knows what happens with COVID when these plants reopen. So far on the pork side, we've only had one plant that was closed that has reopened. That's Columbus Junction. They've been operating at a reduced level since they did reopen. Here's where our capacity would have been. That's the blue line here for this week. And you can see we were going to have maximum weeks that runs above that. Now, we can do that for short periods of time by running extra Saturday shifts. But the difference between what we thought we were going to be on average and the maximum for 2020 was going to last for many weeks in the fourth quarter. So we thought we were going to be in a real bind already. The actual slaughter capacity for this fall may be, or for where we might be, is right here somewhere in the 2.5 range, even in the low 2.4s, even the high 2.4s, where the X is on this chart. So you can see the serious situation that this has caused. Go to the next one, shows you yesterday's, it's dated today. I put Sioux City back in at 50%. You see right there about 6 or 7 lines down. But you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 plants still closed. Another 16, I believe, on this list that are operating at less than 100%. We can only kill, and this thing doesn't, I don't know why it puts the pound signs down here. This number for a 5.4 work week this week would be about 1.62 million head. Last week we beat that 5.4 rate just a bit, so I'm going to guess we're going to be in the mid 1.6s this week on slaughter. We think it's very likely that that this could be the worst of it. Okay, we hope that that's the case because there's some serious talk of reopening 3 to 4 plants next week. The mystery of what happens when you start reopening these plants still remains, and what could happen with rebreaks. We'll just have to see. That's the road not traveled, but we have to travel it. One impact is going to be higher weights. So far this week, at Producers Sold Barrels and Gilts have run a little over 215 pounds. Obviously, if you back hogs up, you're going to be adding those. We're going to be euthanizing some hogs. We already have. We're going to do more of it over the next several weeks. And theoretically, those will be the heaviest hogs out there, but certainly the ones that go to town will still be heavier. And we think that this number is going to keep going up and could get up in the 219 or 20 range pretty easily here in the next month or so. But I will point out those pounds actually are quite useful in this situation if you don't have slaughter high enough. They will help mitigate the impact on production, which you can see in this chart looks just like the slaughter chart. So anything we can add on weights will mitigate that. The pounds are needed. Now, you have problems there on the size of the cuts and how they are handled going into processed products, but I guess that's one of those things that you're going to cross that bridge when you get there because there's no doubt that we're going to have larger hogs. That brings up the possibility of the S word, and this has been a common question to me over the last week about, are we going to have a shortage of pork? And the answer is yes, we are. That doesn't mean we're going to run out of pork, okay? They're still producing 60% of the amounts, the expected amounts. We will be producing higher percentages of that as plants come back on. But some places will not have pork at some times. And that's primarily determined by stores' suppliers. And I'm going to give you a couple examples here. Hormel has been very fortunate and had very few impacts at their Austin, Minnesota plant or at the Holstone Foods plant in Nebraska that they buy all the product out of. Okay, so their customers are probably okay. If your grocery chain is a customer of Tyson, Smithfield, JBS, or Indiana Packers, that's a different story because they've been substantially short. Indiana Packers has been zero on supply because they've been shut down at Delphi. And so it all depends on where your grocery store buys their meat. I talked to a reporter earlier the week, and I mentioned that, and he said, we said, that explains it. And I said, what? And he said, well, I went to my store, and they didn't have anything, and I called my friend who shops at a store a mile down the road, and he said, it's full. I said, yep, probably was just a supplier issue. I don't know how the Packers are going to allocate limited supplies. That's going to be a tough call for them. But there's going to be times when consumers go to their store and they can't buy fresh pork. Now, there may be another store with fresh pork. There may be fresh pork in their store next week, depending on the allocation method. So the major question, what happens to the exports? No reporter has asked me about this yet. And I haven't really, it's not one of those things I'm going to go to if I don't have to. But, you know, if we have empty grocery stores, there's somebody is going to start asking about why are we still exporting product. And it's going to be politicians most likely, and especially if they start paying indemnity payments for destroying pigs or something, you know, I would say that they have every right to ask that. Why are we still exporting if we have empty store shelves? And our exports actually went up again last week. They had trended down for a few weeks, but they went up again. China was very robust in their export business last week. We were almost 10,000 metric tons to Mexico last week. And so that business is going. And if you look at what's happening here, there's a lot of incentive for importing countries to try to get product because they can see some problems developing here in our supply situation. We hope that this is going to level out, and I hope it stays strong, and I certainly hope that we don't try to put any embargoes on because we know that that could destroy long-held relationships and long things that we had fought for many years. But consider what output would be given these slaughters levels through the end of the year. I mean, everyone is focused with, right now we've got all these extra market hogs we don't know where to go with. We either have to make space for them to stay in the buildings by possibly euthanizing baby pigs, or we're going to have to euthanize some market hogs. I mean, we're 1.5 million head short, I think, by the end of this week of where slaughter should have been the last 2 weeks. That means those hogs are still out there, and they're going to have to be done something with them. Now, notice we get closer as we get into the summer, but we have a big gap again in the fall, and we're going to eliminate some wean pigs here in April and May that will impact October and November slaughter. But this is still a large gap in some weeks in the fall if the 2.48, 2.5 million head level is all we can slaughter from a reduced capacity industry. So what happens to prices? Well, I have not rerun price forecasts yet because I really don't have a context to do it in yet. I think we have to see what happens here. These were the price forecasts for net prices that I had before we had the problems, the COVID problems of the last 2 weeks. And you can see they were terrible. They were not going to get above break even the rest of the year. Clearly, they're going to be short of that now. Now, what we have here is the net price received by producers across all purchase methods has been going up. And the reason it's been going up is we have about 35% of the swine pork market formula hogs that are tied to the cutout value. So as the cutout value has gone up, that pricing method has gone up. In addition, the negotiated price has gone up some. We had some bids, I think, in the $45 range yesterday, and so that's good. But I want to make a point here, and that is, and Packer benevolence is not a term that goes together very often, but the Packers could have offered $10 yesterday for those hogs, and they would have got just as many. They're paying money here based on the value of the animals, not on the supply-demand situation they see in the hog market at the moment. Because that has been so out of balance recently that the price could have been $10 or even $0, and they would have gotten just as many hogs as they got paying 30 or 40. We never saw a cash bid below 30. And to that, I kudos to the Packers for that, because they could have done something very different here, and they didn't do it. Now, are they chasing the cutout value up? No, not necessarily, but and we can see that in our calculated Packer gross margin. But let's remember that this gross margin only applies to the pig that they can actually process. So if you're Indiana Packers, you didn't earn that gross margin, you earned $0 last week because you didn't get any hogs done. In addition, others are down, 50 and 60% from their normal capacity. So this is a gross margin on the hogs that you process. And you have to put all the others that you didn't get to process in at $0 on a gross margin. So this is a little misleading. We need to be careful about it. I don't think it's as out of whack as it looks when you look at the chart, when you start thinking about that in terms of it only applies to hogs that you actually process. So what can be done? Well, sow slaughter at this point has gone up, and there have been people call for sow buyouts and all kinds of things, and I would say that really accomplishes nothing in the short run. In fact, it probably burdens our plants a bit that we don't need to do. It will certainly help the fourth quarter and beyond by removing sows from production, but still, it doesn't accomplish much here as we look at the short run. If we look at where sow slaughter has been, it certainly has been going up. We got in the high 60,000 range very quickly in March. Purchase data from last week would suggest that we slaughtered about 70,000 sows last week. We only have a capacity of about 75,000 on a 5-day work week. So we can't reduce this herd very quickly, but we're certainly going to that level. If we look at sow slaughter as a percentage of the breeding herd, let's remember this is a much larger breeding herd than what we had 5 years ago or 8 years ago. We were down in the less than 6 million head. We've had almost 6.5 million head the last 2 or 3 reports. So you've got to kill more sows in a given time period to reduce this breeding herd than you used to. If you look historically here, back in 2007, 8, and 9, we reduced the sow herd pretty dramatically when coronavirus vaccines came along, and we had more pigs living to market weight, and we just simply had too many sows. To do that, we had to run in the 1.1 to 1.15% of the breeding herd every week to reduce the sow herd like we did in 2008, 9, and 10. From 2010 through 2014, we basically maintained the sow herd on slaughter of about 1% of the breeding herd. From 14 to 19, or even early 20, we grew the sow herd on slaughter of about 0.9% of the sow herd. So we've got to get back to this 1.1% level to have meaningful reductions. And you can see that the latest data that we have for this number is getting right to that level. So we're getting to a liquidation level of sow slaughter. We're going to get there, and we're going to reduce this sow herd. We probably need to reduce it, at least 5% and maybe 10% over the next year or so if we're going to get back into a better balanced situation with both packing capacity and with demand. Packing capacity problem is pretty intractable. You could offer hazard pay for workers, ongoing testing to try to remove the fear factor. If I'd be more likely to show up to work today if I knew the guy standing next to me is also negative. Slow down pigs' growth rate. I'm sure many of the people on the call today are already doing that. Destroy animals that get too big. We've sadly seen that already happening, and we're going to see a lot more of it over the next 3 or 4 weeks. It is a terrible thing, and I hate it, and you hate it, and it's not why we're here. In addition, destroy some pigs to allow those hogs to stay in buildings. That's happening as well, and as I pointed out, if we can't get back to full capacity this fall, that really has to happen more than I've heard it happening so far. This is that comparison that we made earlier, and I won't take any time on that. Maintaining export flow, I think, is important for the long run, but will it be tolerated if shelves are empty? I don't know that that's the case. We're going to have to make the case for that. One of the reasons we need to make the case is we can export product that doesn't take much labor, carcasses, for instance, and things that certainly those things that we don't eat a lot of here, especially byproducts and those things. But I think we're going to have some pressure to slow those exports. Government purchase support from food service production facilities announced a couple weeks ago, $1 billion. That's a great gesture, but now it needs to wait. We're short of pork products for the next 4 to 6 weeks, and the good thing here is the government moves slow, and maybe they're not going to get any of those purchases done. But I would say let's kind of push that off for a minute here as we try to deal with these shortages. Direct payments to producers helped only the smallest producers. There's some of you listening in that fell into that category, and I'm glad it helped you. But it really only applied to less than 10% of the total pork supply with any meaningful kind of contribution. The payment limitations are a political thing that always get in the way of trying to support the people who feed us. Losses will mount quickly and force some producers out of business. One question is, will there be any indemnities for destroyed animals? While Joe was talking a while ago, I got a call, or maybe while we were preparing for this, I got a call, and it was a USDA official that wanted to talk about that, and we talked about kind of what might work on that. So hopefully there will be some indemnities coming. They won't be full value indemnities, I can assure you of that, because USDA has to be careful about creating incentives to destroy animals rather than use them here, and so they got to be careful about that. Massive consolidation, I think, is likely. Packers have to have pigs in the long run, and who's going to raise them? And unfortunately, we're going to have some people that financially can't stay in this. And finally, the value determination is being underscored by this catastrophe. I mean, that issue I talked about a while ago with the cutout value going up and dragging up the net price across all animals, and yet we have a negotiated market that by all rights should be zero or very small. And thank goodness the Packers aren't going there. But that's the kind of situation we're in now. So the issue that we've talked about for years of how do we determine value of these animals is coming home to roost in great measure now in this kind of catastrophe. A few closing thoughts. Do everything you can, but realize you can't fix this problem, especially by yourself. It's beyond you. It wasn't your fault it happened. It wasn't the Packers' fault it happened. It wasn't anybody's fault it happened, but it happened. And you can't fix it, especially by yourself. So I would urge you to say, I'm going to do what I can, but I can't take care of this together. Get your team together and talk about everything, and include a counselor or mental health expert. I know Farm Credit Mid-America has a service that they're going to talk about in a little bit. You really need to take advantage of this. I would urge you to do so. Minimize losses wherever you can. You've got to drive your costs lower. I know all of you they spend time every day trying to get lower costs. It becomes critical here. Put off purchases you can't. Cool the diets out. Try to do everything you can. Capture every bit of revenue possible. Again, I don't have to tell you these things, but we need to be reminded. There are still some futures and option strategies that will help you this year. This futures market is still moving, and it's actually come up the last few days generally, and given us some opportunities to minimize losses. You're not going to maximize profits this year. You have to minimize losses. Support one another. Your neighbor may be having more difficulties than you are, and we need to realize that all the time. And for you that are believers, and even you that aren't, I would ask you to read Romans 8:18, 8:28, and 8:38. 3 wonderful verses from the greatest chapter in the Bible, and I think you'll find them useful. Jess, that's all I've got, so I think I'll pitch it back over to Bill.
Thank you very much, Steve and Joe. Those outlooks will be very beneficial, and we appreciate you sharing your insight with our colleagues and producers across the board. That was very valuable. Now I would like to introduce Bill Even, who is the Chief Executive Officer for the National Pork Board. He is responsible for leading the checkoff-funded research, promotion, and education programs for the 60,000 pork producers across the nation. Thank you, Bill, for joining us.
Thanks, Jess. And checking, can you hear me okay?
Hear you fine.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Again, yes, this is Bill Even, your CEO at the National Pork Board here in Des Moines, Iowa. And just got a few slides here to show you what the Pork Board has put together. A number of you have been on our webinars over the past 6 weeks where we've delivered this information, but times like this, over-communicating is critically important. There's an incredible amount of stress and work going on at the farm level, and we want to make sure that you know where to turn if you need some resources, be able to find something on a web page, or try to help you manage a problem on the ground. I'll go ahead and get started here. So if you want to put some numbers around this, as Steve Meyer has just done, Americans eat about 7.5 billion pounds of meat a month. On an annual basis, 22.93 pounds per person of pork, beef, and poultry combined. And right now, when you look at our cold storage inventory, it equates to about 1/3 of the monthly meat demand here in the United States. And as you guys are well aware, the choke point in the chain, you think of it as a bow tie. On one end, you've got the producers and the pigs, and on the other end, you've got the consumers, both here and internationally. And that choke point in the supply chain is really where we're having problems. If there's any good news in the supply chain piece, it's the fact that pork, about 25% of our production is actually going into food service. You want to compare that to the beef inventory, roughly 50% of beef goes into food service. So the closure of restaurants and fast food chains and so forth, the impact on the beef producers has been even greater than on pork. Our hit is really in breakfast. You think about sausage and bacon and ham, that's really the wheelhouse where we pushed a lot of product. So as some of these places are not serving breakfast, that's where you're seeing a lot of pressure coming back on the side of pork from the food service component. The point that Steve Meyer made earlier, I think, is critically important in that we've got our talking points put together behind the scenes with the U.S. Meat Export Federation regarding exports. We're exporting, north of 30% of our U.S. production as we entered the first part of this year. And as we have this massive amount of pigs that can't get through the system and need to get euthanized, and then coupled with these spot shortages and some ongoing shortages we're just legitimately going to see at various places at retail, people are going to start asking questions of how do I get meat, how do I get meat protein, and inevitably the conversation can turn to exports. The point of this is we export a lot of things we don't eat here in the United States. You think about pig's feet, you think about ears and other parts of the hog that just really don't have any value here, but are maximizing the value of the carcass cutout when you're able to export them. So we know as producers we don't want to break into jail on this, and so our approach right now for communication is being prepared and ready for these conversations, and we've got the talking points pulled together to be able to use for you as producers, as well as being able to deliver messages to consumers. If you look at the packing capacity across the United States, this is some work we did with Steve Meyer and Joe Kearns and their group last year. We've got this on pork.to/map. This shows the U.S. pork packing industry. It's a completely interactive map. You can click on the plants, know that they're at full operational capacity. You'll get a sense of what they're possibly using to harvest. Steve Meyer provides updates on a daily basis of the idle capacity and percent of capacity in the United States. We update this map based on information from the packing industry and from the Kearns Group. We've gotten a lot of uptake on this. Feel free to take a look at it. Grab and send the link on to anybody and everybody you want. Make sure it kind of gives a good overview picture. We know the USDA is using this as well to just kind of keep an eye on as a dashboard on what's happening in the system. Ultimately, one of the things that we're trying to do, you think at the pork board, there's two things we're focused on. Number one, what do we need to do to help the meat industry run the plants? Balancing public health along with plant operations is where things are at. Our second focus is in the area of depopulation and disposal, which is here and now, starting in the Midwest, and we anticipate it to spread into the Eastern Corn Belt as time progresses. It's a sad story, but that's the situation we're in. So when you think about what's the checkoff done on the plant operation piece, we've got the economic analysis of these top 20 pork plants in the United States. What does that mean to their communities and so forth? We're sharing that information back out to the state pork associations, so they've got factual information they can use to educate people in their communities. In addition to that, we have got digitally targeted messages around all of these top 20 U.S. pork packing plants and designed to really tell a positive story, supporting the workers, helping reassure consumers that while there's plenty of pork, if you want it in the grocery store, we need these plants to run, and it's going to be a long slog. Our target is we're hoping in a couple of months to have some of these plants maybe running at 80% of capacity. I think Steve mentioned that 90% capacity, that equal to about 2.48 million head per week. We're just going to run at a slower level than what we've been accustomed to. And so while we've got a very urgent issue with depopulation in front of us for the next couple of months, we know this is going to have a tail out through the balance of the year. And that's why our focus on getting these plants operational is really the primary focus. It's not going to stop the depopulation that we're facing, but it is going to help mitigate it over the long haul. Next, we want to make sure that, and this is just a quick snapshot just of the first couple of days of this week, of where we're getting placements in the media and getting the producer's story out into the public. These are very compelling, very passionate, and very real stories of producers that are trying to deal with the problem. And getting the producer's story and their voice into the news cycle is incredibly important right now. Folks have got a lot of stuff coming at them. We have daily consumer sentiment and media monitoring that's pretty granular. And we're seeing the consumer this week start to shift from what I would say, generally speaking, they're experiencing COVID fatigue around just the messaging around what the nation is doing in public health. What we're seeing that shift to, as we're here sitting on Thursday, I think it's Thursday, that message is starting to shift to, okay, am I going to have food? And oh my gosh, what's happening on the farms here? This is terrible. And so we're trying to balance that animal welfare piece that's absolutely horrible with a message to consumers to say, we still want you to eat pork. I think a long-run strategic risk for our industry is what's the pork brand? Think about pork as an umbrella brand for the industry. What's the long-run implications to pork as a brand? So the checkoff and our board of directors is aggressively moving money into a whole new suite of consumer messaging. And then we've also aggressively moved millions of dollars into producer support messaging to truly try to mitigate the fallout from this. Because you've got a consumer that says, gosh, this euthanasia is really disturbing to me. At the same time, we're trying to convince people that pork is a healthy, nutritious, safe food to eat. That's the tension that's right now in the system that the pork checkoff is using a lot of dollars on in that front. So you've heard it mentioned in passing, but I want to draw your attention to just a number of things that we've had out and available for the past month. Our We Care principles for the U.S. pork industry promote animal welfare. And there's a certain series of steps that many of you producers have been taking or are in the middle of taking now in order to do what you can to avoid emergency euthanasia. And you see the website on a lot of these pages. It's thepork.org/COVID-19. Everything that we have available for the industry, much of it has been translated into Spanish as well. And go there to this website, and it's your one-stop shop for grabbing information on how to manage the situation. We ran a couple of webinars. We did one on Sunday around what we call emergency euthanasia and tools. We did that in conjunction with the North Carolina State and the USDA. These are things that just make me sick to my stomach. But it's honestly, we just have to get out in front of it and get the information to people. Right now, we're seeing emergency operation centers get stood up in a number of states. Minnesota is kind of ground zero for the depopulation effort when you look at their packing capacity and the number of pigs in that state. We've got Iowa, South Dakota, and Nebraska all caught in this with the initial slowdown and stoppage of work at the John Morrell plant in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which kind of was the first big hit that's now rippled across the country. We've got all this information available. Please avail yourselves of this. But when I'm talking to state executives, pork association executives across the country, we're really need to get the plants running. That'll help, and particularly more on the back end. But right now, we just need to get ourselves resigned to the fact that the new USDA National Incident Coordination Center, coupled with state emergency operations centers, we've got a number of governors that are now prepared to activate the National Guard to pitch in here. But you're probably looking at regional euthanization centers, repurposing older maybe meat packing facilities or swine facilities. There's just a lot of, I would say, real pragmatic scramble going on the ground of how are we going to get these pigs euthanized in a humane fashion, and how are we going to get them disposed of properly in an environmental fashion. Every state has different rules and regulations, so this does become a state-by-state issue. And sure, look at our website, get the information you need, and really would urge your listeners that are involved in the pork industry to contact their state pork association and really get plugged in there. Not all the answers are going to be available everywhere yet, but rest assured, you've got an army of people from your state vet, your state secretaries of agriculture, your state pork associations, and groups like Farm Credit. Everybody is interested in mitigating this, but also pragmatically knowing how we're going to deal with it, as I say, with some semblance of humanity to the animals and to the farmers that are involved. We also have information available around disposal consideration and tools. A lot of good information on our website, including webinars and information from the USDA as well. We've got the fact sheets from the NRCS EQIP program, and that's available. And the important thing for your producers to know, be sure to document what's going on before you get started. Ultimately, talking to an accredited veterinarian, talking to your NRCS office, and checking in with them and say, I'm just out of options. I've got to start taking the top end off my barn, or maybe perhaps depopulating an entire barn. You need to get a hold of someone and get some verification of some data. We'd really hate for someone to just go ahead and do the terrible unnecessary component of depopulation without really checking in with somebody to give some third-party verification. There's no clarity right now on indemnity or anything else in the long run. The National Pork Producers Council and Craig Bowling is going to speak next. They'll be able to comment on that. But we're in the middle of it now, folks. Get the records put together. The next slide is really, I think, tying in a bit with what Steve Meyer ended on. Everybody is sick to their stomach and angry and frustrated and worried right now, both financially and what we're having to do. But if you focus on the fact that the virus is the enemy, it's not a neighbor, it's not the packing industry, it's not a trucking company, it's COVID-19. And if you think about, okay, there's the enemy, it's not in our group, and everybody here is leaning in, trying to help one another. the bottom line, whether it's people working on the farm or in the barn or at the packing plant or in the grocery store, the president's executive order that enacted the Defense Production Act for the packing industry, when you look at it and read it, it's really focused on ensuring that people in the food industry have got priority access for personal protective equipment and testing. Because once you provide that assurance to people, as Steve had indicated, okay, I feel comfortable enough going to work, and so we reduce the absenteeism and we've got people's health protected. It's no different than what you're doing on your farm. You know, what we're focused on is keeping our pigs and our people healthy, and the food chain needs to do the same thing. There is pork in the nation, but we just can't get it through the packing industry and the processing industry. That's the message that we need to get to consumers. That if you're gonna have food and you're gonna have it at a price that is affordable during this recession, we need the plants to run. And at the end of the day, every one of you is doing what you need to do in order to try to mitigate or avoid emergency euthanasia. But the fact of the matter is that it's here today. And for those of you, particularly here in the Eastern Corn Belt, that may be the primary on this call, recognize and watch what's happening in Minnesota. We're talking with those folks in the upper Midwest and be able to say, okay, here's what we learned in this. Use this time to prepare. Visiting with your state vet and your state ag secretary, getting everybody's heads in the game with your bankers and so forth, is you've got a little bit of planning time here, and let's take advantage of that as possible. And then the other point, here's the website again. Here's the 1-800 number to the pork board, and there's our email address for questions. On our website, we also have a full list of stress management or mental health resources. The worst thing that a farmer can do, you spend your whole life growing things, right? Plants or animals. And when you have to go out and destroy something that you spent your whole career raising, it is very, very difficult. And we want to make sure that we're here during the dark days that we're going to be in for the next month or so, working alongside of people. I can't emphasize Steve Meyer's point as well. And what I've told a lot of folks is, hey, don't equate your net worth with your self-worth as a producer. Your net worth goes up and down. It goes up and down with the markets and how much grain you have in the bin or how many cattle or hogs you have on the farm and what that price is. But your self-worth as a person doing the most noble profession known to man, and that's raising food to feed others, that's who we are as people. And the number of stories that I've had from other producers supporting each other and pragmatically tackling this tough problem is I guess it makes me proud to be part of an industry that cares about each other enough. And I certainly want to thank the folks at Farm Credit for putting this webinar here today. Jess and the team, you know, we're right in the middle of it. This information is timely and important, and you don't have to go through it alone. We've got folks here that are more than ready, willing, and able to help. And with that, I will end my comments and turn it over to my colleague at the National Pork Producers Council, Mr. Craig Bowen.
Thank you, Bill, for sharing that message. Very timely, and while difficult, we appreciate you facing this head on. I'd now like to introduce Craig, and he is currently the Vice President of Resource Development at the National Pork Producers Council. He is in charge of running the SIP program that a lot of you are familiar with, and also the allied industry, as well as the World Pork Expo. Thank you, Craig, for joining us.
Thanks, Jess, and thanks Farm Credit Mid-America for the opportunity to share some of the things that NPPC is working on, as well as the state associations on behalf of pork producers across the United States. Thanks to Bill and others and some of the things they've shared, and NPPC would echo. We're in the trenches with you. We're hearing from producers every day, and know that both all your national organizations and state organizations are trying to do the best they can to get you the resources you need and help with the the least amount of interruptions to your business that we can. Jess talked a little bit about it, but National Pork Producers Council, their rules nationally are, first of all, we're a voluntary organization. We get our funds from voluntary investment from producers at 10 cents per $100 value through the Strategic Investment Program, as well as Allied Industry. Farm Credit Mid-America is a partner of ours, and we're proud to have them, as well as PPIC, our Packer Processor Industry Council. So working across the chain, and then our roles nationally would be on the legislative, regulatory, and trade side. Of that 10 cents per $100 value, we share that back with the state, 40%, so the state can do the exact same issues. We'll talk about those issues. So when I talk about partnering with states, that is through our the state's membership of MPPC. That's the council, if you will, and the actions that we're working on. So I think first to share is MPPC's goals that minimize business interruptions the best they can, and keep in mind the state associations and MPPC and the Pork Board, AASV, the swine vets, as well as NAMI have been working as hard as they can to keep that from happening and attacking all challenges to that. MPPC had a letter out actually to Congress March 10th for a call to action on concerns over labor around COVID-19. So we've been hard at it and had our grassroots network of producers and allied industry sending letters for call to action to your legislators. One of the first things that MPPC worked on was help get agriculture deemed essential. So part of that was to get our producers, packing plants, suppliers across the board deemed essential. So if there were stay-at-home orders and other things that came forward, which we have seen in multiple states, that our producer could still get to work, travel, etc. We helped develop a document for producers to use to be able to get to work and to and from work. So the other thing that we've worked hard with is not only lobbied Congress, but lobbied USDA and had almost daily communication with the Secretary as well as undersecretaries for APHIS and other agencies, direct communication of what's going on, as well as provide avenues for our pork leadership to have those conversations about what's going on in the industry, so your voice is heard. We also, in USDA, want to make sure that one of the key components early was to make sure that we had a commitment from USDA that we had FSIS inspectors to be able to inspect hogs at packing plants. We partnered with state associations to help relax non-essential inspections and regulations for our producers, knowing that they're going to have challenges, whether that was with trucking and weights to capable limitations to environmental regulations at the state level, and we're able to be successful on a number of those. Also communicating that pork is safe. There's no issues with pigs or pork for COVID-19. One of the things we work with state associations is, and that's the part of the partnership, right? So state associations are working very hard at state municipal government level, as well as the county level, governors, senators, House members. MPPC has been working on administration, FEMA and other agencies tirelessly. One of the things that we did early, actually in March, and have continued through, is having state delegation calls with legislators. Your state associations, and there were over 13 of them, that we put together meetings directly with your senators and House representatives, with producers on the call, having conversations directly with them about the issues and the challenges that face the industry, and communicating directly with them on the phone, as well as with calls to action. Our last call to action last week in regards to our ask to not only the president but to USDA generated over 1,500 direct communications with legislators. One of the things, and the main things that and it's been talked about, and then Bill talked about the tool at the Pork Board. Steve talked about also monitoring plants, but it's keeping plants open. Keep in mind, packers are trying to kill every pig they can. They've worked closely with North American Meat Association, the state associations, MPPC, to keep those open, and that they were deemed essential. And this was a wrestling match and has been, not only at the state level, but at the county level. And one thing to keep in mind is packing plants are unique in that they are washed from ceiling to floor daily. So they're one of the cleanest places to be. And plants are doing health screenings and other extra cleaning on top of this, as well as providing personal protection equipment to barriers, to altering shifts, every tool they can to keep running. The closures that we've had are a result of pressure from state, county, municipal officials. There's pressure also around absenteeism and employees of fear of coming to work in regards to possibly catching the disease. So we've had tests in the plant, lucky to have those. They've been extensively tested. The challenge is they're not representative of the community that they're in, and that there's not testing going on in that municipal area, so they're perceived as hot spots. So that's an increased part of the challenges. So it's already been talked about, Steve talked about it, but the Defense Protection Act that President Trump issued Tuesday night, pork and the pork industry was a big influence of this. You saw that in the announcement. Obviously, we have to have this to keep running through the pigs that we have coming to market, as Dr. Meyer illustrated. This basically classifies packing plants as essential infrastructure that must stay open, all right? It enhances the arguments for federal government to overrule these state and local government actions that's going on. From our indications that exports are not affected by the DPA at this time. It brings consistent plants and priority for personal protective equipment for workers, testing, and other measures to help give plant workers confidence in a safe work environment. Delegates USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue to do what is necessary to support the supply chain. All right, but remember that it can keep a plant open, but it can't make employees come to work. So part of bringing more confidence to those workers is the testing, the personal protective equipment, and other measures that the plants can implement. Some of the other things that MPPC has asked for is assistance with depopulation. I'm referring to euthanization, mortality, and disposal. There's a number of different agencies to be involved in this. We've asked for indemnification from USDA, NRCS, and your state, help with support costs of burial and disposal, as well as many states have applied to FEMA for disaster assistance, which would help with grants at the state level through your state Department of Agriculture and state vet. So MPPC lobbied for direct payments to producers without limitations. There was $1.6 billion directed to USDA for payments. We talked about earlier, there are limitations to those, $125,000 per individual. We realize with those losses that is short, and we continue to ask for money for that. We've been told that USDA will have those payments will go out in May. We also lobbied for pork purchases, as Steve mentioned before. So there was $3 billion in agriculture purchases, $1 billion in meat, which would consist of pork and chicken. And part of what has been solicited for that is the products that are in the supply chain for food service. So that would be cured, cooked, or smoked pork. And that is an intention to get that product into the chain, as well as the first wave of this would be put together in what I'm terming commodity packs, if you will. And not only would those be available for food banks, but they would be available for all nonprofits. So churches would have the ability to get those, and other nonprofits for distribution. So it's an attempt to get purchases of product that would have went into food service. MPPC also lobbied for changes in the Small Business Administration loans. Originally, those in the COVID package were intended for agriculture. With the Small Business Administration taking the lead, we had some challenges with agriculture qualifying for that. and limited access for loans or farm credit banks to be certified for that. We've got that fixed with COVID 3.5. Ag is included in the Economic Disaster Loan Program. There's $310 billion for Paycheck Protection Program, and working capital up to $10 million can qualify for 8 weeks of forgiveness and receive 1% interest on the balance. I'd encourage you to reach out to Farm Credit for more details on that. As I mentioned, farm credit banks were qualified to help producers with these changes to make this more seamless. One of the things we still need to get fixed is Small Business Administration and PPP on how they calculate, make these calculations for agriculture. We've had some challenges if you're the sole proprietor and took a loss. The current formula does not allow the flexibility for wage calculation, and we're trying to get that fixed legislatively. So what are we going to do in the future? The next COVID package 4.0, the legislation asks that we are asking for $50 billion for all agriculture, $5 billion for pork with no payment limitations. And we talked, Steve Meyer talked about some of the challenges with those payment limitations. Indemnification of $1 billion for Emergency Livestock Assistance Program through USDA, euthanasia and disposal funds for APHIS, FEMA, and NRCS. Small business loan fixes. We talked about the eligibility and that language on the calculation, but also raise that upper limit from 500 employees to 1,500 employees. And then also looking at changing tax law to look back 7 years instead of 5 years, and other changes to benefit producers and what they're going through. I think the main thing to realize is, or to understand, is the NPPC is looking to get producers as much money as possible for direct and indemnity payments and for other uses. So trying to get as many resources, no matter what agency they're from, to benefit producers to be able to work through the challenges that they have today. One of the things you can do, and like I said, if you'd like more information, Bill talked about the National Pork Board is really the library, if you will, for all those resources. I'd encourage you to go to there for those COVID resources. Also, National Pork Producers Council, nppc.org, would give an update of the policy and different actions that NPPC is working on the national level. I'd echo Bill and to reach out to your state association. State associations are working very hard at state and local level, as well as working with their producers to influence national legislators, governors, secretaries of ag, and need to hear from you. So those of you that are investors, we have a 1 p.m. call today. If you want to understand more or learn about the Strategic Investment Program, that is also on our website at nppc.org. Know that all of your organizations have heard from you, understand what you're going through, and are trying to do the best to give you the resources you need to get through COVID-19. With that, Jess?
Thank you, Craig, and thanks again for sharing everything that you have, and both you and Bill for dedicating the time. We realize how very busy you are today. Various speakers today have mentioned this, and Farm Credit also wants to echo our empathy for the situation that is occurring. We know how stressful it is. For this reason, we want to make you aware of a resource available to all customers of Farm Credit Mid-America, LifeWorks Resource Program. It helps customers and their families navigate a variety of personal and work-related challenges. By contacting LifeWorks, customers and their dependents can confidentially access information, resources, and one-on-one support any time of the day, any day of the week, and there is no cost associated with that at all. If you feel you need additional resources during these challenging times, the contact information is on the screen, or reach out to your FO or financial officer. They can direct you. There is also information on our website. I also want to reiterate that even during these difficult times, Farm Credit Mid-America remains very committed to stand beside our customers and our communities. Since the COVID-19 outbreak began, we have donated more than $100,000 to 25 food banks across Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee to combat the crisis and support those who are struggling in this time. And today, I'm pleased to share that on behalf of pork producers who we know are struggling across the nation, we are providing additional financial support to the Million Meals program as well as the Pork Power programs in Ohio and Indiana. These programs bring together pork producers and industry partners to deliver whole hog ground pork for food banks and families in need. It's just one more way that we can demonstrate the value of agriculture and show that even in challenging times, pork producers care for their communities. Thank you again to all of our customers, team members, and swine industry advocates for joining us today. If you have any additional questions or would like to get in touch with options and ways Farm Credit Mid-America can support you, you can reach out via the contact information for me on the screen, or contact any of the other team members on the swine team, Tim Healy or Lee Heron, as well as contact your local financial officer. It's been a pleasure to host you. Please know that our thoughts and best wishes are with you and your families as we really understand the challenging and unforeseen times that we have in the coming weeks. Best wishes, and we hope to speak with you in person soon. Thank you.